Well, this tutorial is called Go Configure, and the reason is we have shell.exe through msys2, and that means we can build libraries and things from source the Linux way. So here, for instance, we have zlib -1.2.11, which we shall need, and we have here a file called configure, and configure is what's known as a shell script. Now this is quite an old-fashioned configure file, but if I just do shell configure --help, it tells us something about the usage. Many configure files, but not this one, actually test whether you've got a C or a C++ compiler by compiling a small executable and seeing if the executable's there. If you've got your antivirus software turned on, it'll probably just delete the executable, and then the shell script will test to see if the executable's there and find that it isn't, and everything will crash. So one of the peculiarities about configure scripts is quite often you need to switch off your antivirus software before you even start. Another peculiarity is you can see that you've got configure.guess and configure.sub. These are important files, and they're quite often way out of date. Your operating system might be a fair bit newer than anything that the configuration file can possibly guess at. So to cure this situation, what you have to do is go and download and git clone this thing, config.git, and that gives you the latest config.sub and config.guess. I keep a copy of both of those new ones in my home directory, and I've copied them here. After reading some instructions, I'll just do that. You'll nearly always need the ---- prefix thing in shell configure ---- prefix. And here I've decided to put everything, the include, the bin, the library, everything under -gw. On Linux you can just leave the prefix quite often, and it'll put it in the default directories /user/local, but we have c:/-gw. Another peculiarity with shell scripts and also with makefiles is your directories, the paths to your directories have // in them, not /. That one can quite often get to you. Well, I've noticed I have a Win32 directions, and that has a readme file in it, and it tells me I have to do this. You see, I've got make install -force this Win32 directory, the makefile.gcc, so we're using the minimum GNU for Windows C compiler, and it tells me also that I have to set the library path. Here I've set it to min GNU for Windows library include path, include binary path bin. And there you are, that's all worked, and I've just checked and everything's as it should be. Here we are. We need to install this library too, the PNG image format library. We've done a shell configure with the prefix as we often have to do. Worked all fine, and then we do make. Well, I've just gone into that directory and corrected the path to the zlib.h and typed make again, and because I'm using an administrator command tool, I can do make install and it installs it. And here, for instance, we see in min-gw/lib we have libpng, libpng16, and so on. And we could go to include, search for png, and there we are. We've got our header files there, and so on. I've got the GLTT library, and I've also got the FreeType1 library, but I'm not going to install either of those for now. Instead, what I'll do is install FreeType2. Well, here we are in the FreeType2 directory. I've copied my config.sub and config.guess, so they're definitely up to date. And now let's just try that. Is1 did make an a.exe file, and because the antivirus is off, it didn't delete it, and the configuration has survived and continued that step. Well, here we are. It's finished. It's finished with a warning about docwriter, which we can live without that, whatever it is. So configure should have made a custom built makefile for our system. So let's just type make, and now we do make install. Well, when you're doing data visualization, even if it's the simplest of graph plots, you need to do text, and that means you have to have fonts. Now, if you have three-dimensional graphics, of course, you'll have fonts rendering the numbers on your axes labels, and graph titles, and so on. And you'll need to be able to zoom in, zoom out, rotate and scale and do all kinds of stuff. And one of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways you can do that is using the OpenGL FreeType library, which is called OGLFT, and here you can see it's hosted on SourceForge. That needs access to the FreeType library, so we definitely want to use OGLFT because we already have graphics working on Linux using the FreeType library. In fact, you can't use the Microsoft TrueType libraries directly. There's all kinds of copyrights and all kinds of things going on there. So FreeType is a necessity on Linux, but of course you can directly access your Microsoft fonts using Microsoft software without any problems. Anyway, one of the prerequisites to use OGLFT is you have to have something called GLE installed. So there you are, it's a usual dependency hell. In order to use OGLFT, you have to install GLE. So here you are. This is basically explaining what GLE does. So in the last part of this tutorial, we shall install GLE and OGLFT. We shall try and build GLE using whatever means possible. Well, here we are in our GLE library. The configure has crashed and burned. It says it can't find the X11 libraries, but we're not on a Linux system. We're not using the X11 Windows system or anything like it. So we appear to be stuck. You'll notice there's a ms-visual-c folder here. You can go into that and use Visual Studio to install GLE. However, that would be a mistake for us because we're not using Visual C for our graphics. While it builds the libraries and everything in the usual way, you have a problem, because if you try and link it in with the GCC compilers, it starts to complain that it can't find huge amounts of stuff to do with the Windows Visual C runtime libraries. So we're stuck again. Well, it looks actually like it's a fairly simple library, so perhaps we can just build it in the very simple way that we did in earlier tutorials. This is a slight alteration I've made to config.h.in. Right at the bottom I've put #define xDisplay_missing1. I've copied config.h.in to config.h, and I've config.h to the source directory src. Well, here we are in the source directory, and as you see, it's just a the small bunch of C files and header files. Some of those C files and headers need config.h, and there it is. So here we are. We've just used gcc-c for all the C files, and it's generated the objects. We've generated a small batch file that just compiles the objects into an archive, and I've just changed that gfortran to a gcc here. Anyway, we can build the DLL in the way that we did in the earlier tutorials. So here we are, we've built our archive. You can see we've got the DLLs, and we also have GLE.h, and we can copy all of those up to the mingw include, mingw bin and mingw lib directories, and we've effectively installed the library. Well, will it work? Well, I can tell you already that it does. And finally, at the end of this long hard slog of an install, we're back amongst our graphics library downloads directory, and we're going to go into OGLFT -0.9, and we've downloaded this zipped tar file, unzipped it, and extracted the archive. So apart from the GLE library, it's absolutely vital that FreeType 2 is installed, and not only that, that we give it access to the FreeType library, especially mingw include FreeType 2 directory, and especially this file ft2build.h. We've copied our config.guess and .sub to the subdirectory called config that you can see there. They need to be there. Here we are, we've done a shell configure -- help. Almost certainly will do something with some of these flags. The include path to where ft2build.h is, and of course /, and let's see what happens. Well, we've tried this shell /configure with our cxx flags, subdirectory liboglft. We've successfully managed to configure it, or at least we think we have. We don't have the Qt demos, but we don't really care about that. Let's see if the make works. Well, we ran this shell /configure because the configure file is in the directory above us. We did this cxx flags because the modern compilers are a bit strict. We did this IC directory, and we did the prefix thing. Now we had to hack the configure file. I've commented out this line 8981, which has got the Linux include path to FreeType 2, or the usual one, and now I've added these things in quotes, all of them: mingw include, FreeType 2, FreeType 2 FreeType, and FreeType 2 FreeType /config. I've added these 4 lines to the configure file, and there's yet another peculiarity. The configure file has given us a make file, or at least we think we have, but we have to go to liboglft and the subdirectory of that, liboglft, and that make file actually works. I've just built these libraries here, and now she'll do install.